you wrote there was no essential motivation behind the British Empire. Try to describe that for the listener who has a certain view of what the empire was.
Yes. So let's go back to the beginning. And the beginnings are in the 1500s and early 1600s. In the 1500s, you get English seamen crossing the Atlantic and setting up or trying to set up bases on the eastern coast of North America. So what are they doing there? Do they have interest in taking over North America? Well, no, not at that point. They're there partly because they've heard tales of gold, so they're in search of gold. And I mean that might sound rapacious and grubby to us, but hey, in the 1800s, in the 1800s, you have Chinese people going to Australia and Malaya in search of gold because people want to make themselves better off. Some of us play the lottery because we want to become filthy wealthy. It's no different, except we don't have to take the risk of crossing the Atlantic. Anyway, so some people were in search of gold, which they didn't find, but also they were commissioned by the Crown to make life difficult for the Spanish. The Spanish were shipping bullion from Spanish colonies in South America and the Caribbean to Spain, and Spain posed a mortal threat to England. So the irony there is that part of the origins of English empire in the 1500s was anti-imperial, right? They were against the Spanish Empire. Roughly a little later, in the 1600s, you have the East India Company set up. This is a company that had a royal monopoly to trade with India. So you have English merchants going out to India. Why? To trade. Why? To make money. No shame in that. But one thing leads to another in India and indeed in North America. And so you have the East India Company setting up trading posts with the permission of local rulers. And then the local rulers end up fighting wars with their neighbors. And they call upon their mates in the East India Company and say, hey, can you come and give us a hand? Because war is not good for trade, war is not good for the economy, the East India Company did have an interest in peace. It may not have an interest particularly in seeing one Indian prince beat another, but it didn't have an interest in peace. So helping one Indian prince overcome another, maybe the Indian prince had been attacked, was in the company's interests. They did that, and they got rewarded, sometimes with land, sometimes with ports. And over time, they gradually acquire more and more territory. And India, until 1858, was not ruled by the crown. It was ruled by a company. It was only after the horrors of the Indian Mutiny of 1857 that the British government took control away from the East India Company, and India became the possession of the crown. So there we have certainly people going out to try and make a better life for themselves, and of course in North America in particular, in the late 1700s and most of all in the 1800s, you have hundreds of thousands of British people, Irish people, Scottish people crossing the Atlantic in search of a better life, often fleeing poverty and famine in Scotland and England and Ireland. So the irony there is the immigrants who went across to North America to achieve a better life there, their motivation is no different from the people who are trying to cross the channel right now. And we may, and I do think illegal immigration has to be stopped. Sympathetic though I might be to the people who are trying to build a better life, Um, but the motivation may be okay, but the means in the case of illegal migrants is not. But again, in terms of what motivated the empire, and then yes, sometimes you get people who are professional military folk, and they like to do their stuff, and they go and invade territory they shouldn't invade, because what's a soldier for except fighting? But then you get the abolition of slavery in the early 1800s, and the British were among the first peoples in the history of the world to abolish slave trading and slavery. And from 1807 onwards, the British used their growing imperial power to suppress slavery from Brazil across Africa, across India, Malaya, Australia to New Zealand. So there was also a humanitarian motive. So when I say there's no single motive, the whole array of motives, and not all of them were bad, and no economic exploitation and just conquering other peoples for the fun of it was not generally the case.
What are some of the goods that the British Empire produced?
Quite a number of them, and if let me encourage your listeners to go buy my book and look on page 277. You'll see a long list of good stuff, preceded on page 276 by a shorter list of bad stuff.
Which we can come on to, by the way. I don't want to tilt this too heavily in one favour.
No.
We'll just be accused of being shills for evils, I think, otherwise.
Absolutely, and whitewashing the empire.
Yep.
So some of the good stuff. The imposition of imperial authority did end inter-tribal warfare in New Zealand, in South Africa, and elsewhere. Because when you have an overarching authority, it helps to stop squabbles between people who are subject to it. The authority can control and manage the conflict. So that was good, and that was also good not only because it lessened the loss of life, caused people to be less generally fearful. It's also good, of course, for economic prosperity, because war is not good for economic prosperity on the whole. So it was that. Also from 1840 till 1920s, I think, the British Empire was committed to free trade. Yes, that meant that English manufacturers of cloth, English manufacturers who mass-produced cloth through industrial methods, could ship it out to India and undercut the prices of cloth produced by artisans in India, which was not good for the native producers. On the other hand, the imperial free trade allowed Indian entrepreneurs to send their sons to Cambridge and then observe industrial practices in Manchester, take back plant and expertise to India, build steel mills and textile mills in the 1890s, so that by the 1930s, India, I think, was the fourth largest producer of steel in the world, and the mills were owned by Indians. And by the way, you may have noticed, well, who owns what little remains of the British steel industry in South Wales?
Tata Steel.
Tata was an Indian industrialist who sent his son to Cambridge in the late 19th century, and he began to build his empire under the British. Yeah. So there was that. There was also the exploitation of liberal institutions and of a extraordinarily incorrupt civil service, most famously in India, but also in Africa. You may not like bureaucrats, but it sure helps if they're honest. And the British in India, and again in India, the senior civil service was populated by the British, and there were about 1,200 of them. but they were conscientious public administrators. And you get the tradition of the rule of law, impartial courts. You get a free press. You don't get democracy until 1930s in India, but then it was only in 1928 that men and women got the vote in equal terms in Britain. You don't get democracy, but you do get a free press, and the free press in Hong Kong, in India, in South Africa, often run not by Brits but by natives, could be fiercely critical of colonial government. And the judiciary in Kenya during the Mau Mau uprising of the 1950s and 60s was fiercely critical of colonial government. And so the British exported liberal institutions that held colonial government to account in the way that government in China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia to this day is not held to account. And my final, two more points on the positive stuff. Final point would be that, the penultimate point would be 1939 to 45, the British Empire was committed to fight Nazi Germany. And between May 1940 and June 41, May 1940 when France fell, June 41 when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union, the British Empire offered Nazi Germany the only military resistance, with the sole exception of Greece. And then finally, just to toot the empire's trumpet, right now, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, Britain, and the United States, all parts of the old British Empire at one point, are among the most prosperous and most liberal countries on earth. And according to the World Values Survey over a year or so ago, Britain, Australia, and Canada are among the least countries on earth. Oh, excuse me, the least racist countries on earth, in sharp contrast to China, Russia, and Japan. So I rest my case, my lord.